I love the theme of this conference, Include Unheard Voices. Thanks for including mine. Being white and privileged makes it easier for me to get heard. What barriers do I face? I'm a woman, I'm old, maybe I'm disabled. An acoustic neuroma ate most of the hearing in my left ear a couple of years ago, and I'm just about to graduate to 2 hearing aids from 1. And thanks to arthritis, I had a total shoulder replacement last October. My impairments aren't noticeable. I'm not incapacitated, but I am definitely less capacitated. I don't try and hoist my suitcase into that bin anymore, and I'm very careful about where I sit or stand in a room so I can hear what people are saying. I was asked to speak about designing for our future selves. Who is that? Our older selves and our less physically capable selves. Cognitive decline is not inevitable, but everyone lucky enough to grow old is going to age into impairment of some kind to some degree. And it doesn't take much head scratching to realize that this is what most of our anxiety and apprehension about growing older is actually about, how our minds or bodies might change over time. That's not actually about age. Plenty of youngers live with disability and plenty of olders do not. It is the belief that being non-disabled is quote-unquote normal, and that leading meaningful, desirable lives means staying youthful and impairment-free. Those beliefs sustain capitalism, white supremacy, and patriarchy. Those beliefs are delusional, and those beliefs exclude. They exclude most of humanity. At least 15% of the world's population has a disability. Half of us are no longer young, and our numbers are growing. Medical advances mean that more disabled people are reaching adulthood and beyond, and a new wave of COVID survivors is facing disability for the first time. And all over the world, people are living longer. Population aging is a permanent, global demographic trend. The antidote to exclusion from a design perspective is universal design. I don't know if you're familiar with the curb cut effect. It refers to the fact that curb cuts, which were mandated by the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990, were handy not just for people using wheelchairs, but for anyone pushing a stroller or tugging a suitcase or pushing a delivery cart. They made life easier for everyone, the premise of universal design. Another important aspect of the curb cut effect, as products and policies become mainstream, they shed stigma. Stigma is the reason I don't love asking someone to speak louder. I don't want to be seen as the deaf old lady in the room. It's the reason a middle-aged friend opted for crutches over a cane when she broke her foot, because crutches signal injured instead of disabled. It's the reason so many older people who age into immobility issues refuse to use walkers or wheelchairs, even when it means never leaving home, because the stigma is so great. And cognitive impairment is even more stigmatized. Shame affects quality of life even more than externally imposed stigma. Universal design disrupts this shame and stigma. Designing for radical inclusion requires fundamental social change, the business I'm in. Here are 5 ways you can help bring that change about. Number 1, check your own bias. From childhood on, we are barraged by messages about how awful it's going to be to grow old and how tragic it is to be disabled. And unless we stop to challenge these messages, it's easy for them to become part of our identity, usually unconsciously. Everyone is ageist. Everyone is ableist. No judgment. But we can't challenge bias unless we're aware of it. And these messages and ways of thinking are not good for us because they're rooted in shame about something that shouldn't be shameful. That's how prejudice works. We see the other group, or what we want to think of as other, at least, as alien, as lesser than ourselves. In fact, everyone is old or future old, and everyone who has injured themselves or been very sick has experienced disability, even if temporarily. You are not designing for them. You are designing for us. Number 2, take the neck test. Look around. If everyone on the team or in the room is the same age and no one has a disability, stop. Put the brakes on until you have remedied the situation, because you cannot retrofit diversity. You can't add it in later. That's why the mantra of the disability justice movement is nothing about us without us. The first step in targeting any audience should really be to shut up and listen. No one knows better what olders and people with disabilities want and need than older people and people with disabilities. Include us in your design process from the get-go. The UN-backed Unstereotype Alliance polled more than 100 senior UK marketing executives about making their campaigns more diverse. 70% said it was a priority. 64% said what was holding them back was a fear of, quote, getting it wrong. There is only one way to get it wrong, not to try at all. If we're going to raise unheard voices, we need to try to do better and keep trying. It's iterative. It's hard. It's awkward. You'll make mistakes. I have made a bunch of them. As a friend who does diversity and inclusion professionally consoled me, when you're one up in terms of privilege, when you haven't had the lived experience, it's easy to get yourself in hot water. I won't make those mistakes again, but I'll make new ones. Inevitably, because culture and identity are moving targets. What matters to one person doesn't matter to another, and vice versa. We have to listen, draw on what we've learned, and keep at it. That is how we move this ball down the field. Number 3, be an ally. For example, for decades, people with disabilities have been asking employers to make it possible to work from home. When COVID cropped up and put the health of the general population at risk, these accommodations magically became possible. We need to pressure companies to make those accommodations permanent, to help keep everyone safe, and to lower barriers to full employment for all. A mandate of the disability justice movement is to stand in solidarity with other marginalized groups, the way the Black Panthers did in San Francisco in 1977 by bringing supplies and cooked meals to the over 100 disabled protesters who occupied a government office for almost a month to demand action on the law that paved the way for the Americans with Disabilities Act. Quote, speak up not only for your own disability, but for invisible disabilities and disabled people of color as well, urges activist Alice Wong, the author of Disability Visibility. Speak up too for older people with disabilities. Number 4, the bull looks different. We see age and disability through the lens of loss. And from the outside, what people lose as they age is more obvious than what we gain. Those losses are real and wrenching. But from the inside, the experience is different. People adjust. Life remains very much worth living. And it was a geriatrician at Johns Hopkins who put this in a way that really stuck with me. His mantra was a Mexican saying, the appearance of the bull changes when you enter the ring. The spectator's point of view is different from the matador's. The sight of an old woman hunched over a walker used to make me mutter, put me out of my misery if I ever get like that. And now I mutter, just as fervently, the bull looks different. The bull looks different. We live in a culture obsessed with youth and speed, and it is not surprising that so many of us grossly underestimate the quality of life of older and disabled people. We project our fears, and glossing over the very real challenges of aging into disability does no one any favors. But neither does the assumption that even highly circumscribed lives are not worth living. The underlying issue is the discrimination that makes aging into disability so much harder than it ought to be. Which leads to my final point. 5, aging and disability are not problems. Don't think of them that way. We live under capitalism, which sorts us according to our social and economic usefulness. In old land, those are the successful agers, people who go to great lengths to try and look and move like younger versions of themselves. Because under this scenario, to age is to fail. In Crip land, those people are the super Crips, people who compensate for their disability in some extraordinary way. Because under this scenario, disability is something to be overcome. In fact, we are who we are because of how much we've seen and done, and because of how our minds and bodies function, not despite it. In fact, people age well not by avoiding chronic illness and disability, but by adapting to them. The bull looks different. These are powerful generative processes that inform what it means to be human. The problem is the environment, not the individual. The solution is to redesign environments and society to remove barriers to inclusion for all. Thank you for engaging in this really important work.